I'm Natalie Harper, 30, standing on the front porch of the house I once called home. Snow clings to the eaves, my fingers numb as I shift from foot to foot. Then the door creaks open. My sister Leanne stares back at me, eyes cold as ice. "You're not welcome here." Her voice slices through the air like broken glass. I glance past her just enough to see the living room aglow with warmth and laughter. My parents, Eleanor and Jim Harper, clink their glasses at the dinner table. My younger brother Dylan is carving the ham. And by the fireplace, I spot Grandma's famous cranberry pie. I whisper, "Okay," and walk back down the steps into the falling snow. 10 minutes later, I sit in my rental car engine, off staring at the dashboard in silence. Then the front door bangs open, and I hear it, Dad calling my name. Before I share what happened next, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories like this one. 3 years earlier, I'd left Bozeman, Montana for good. Portland, Oregon became my new start. I found a role as a creative strategist at a small ad firm, made friends who didn't ask about high school, and settled into a one-bedroom loft that, while tiny, felt like mine. Back in Bozeman, everything stayed the same. A town of 12,000 where people still remember your GPA and whether you showed up to church on Easter. Dad ran Harper's Hardware on Main Street. Mom had taught kindergarten for decades. Dylan stayed behind managing inventory for the store. And Leanne could do no wrong. Prom queen, 4.0 GPA, married to Kyle, the town's favorite firefighter. She became the face of the Bozeman Welcome Committee and never once missed a PTA meeting. I was always different. I liked writing over sports and debates over dances. I didn't want a white picket fence. I wanted a passport and a packed suitcase. The divide widened over time. Mom's innocent jabs about my lifestyle. Leanne's eye rolls when I brought up my career. The final straw. My graduation dinner, when Mom said, "We're just not sure what kind of future this media stuff holds." And now, years later on Christmas, I stood on that porch and heard the same message loud and clear. I didn't belong. Leanne, 6 months pregnant with her first child, managed to turn my graduation dinner into her baby's gender reveal. 1 second, my degree was the focus, and the next, everyone was clapping over blue confetti cupcakes. Mom gushed about nursery paint colors, while Dad half-heartedly tried to steer the conversation back to my achievement. Later that night, I quietly shared my disappointment. Leanne snapped that I was being dramatic and accused me of always needing the spotlight. Mom agreed with her. Only Dad attempted to mediate, but his soft-spoken efforts did little more than delay the inevitable. 2 weeks later, I signed the offer letter from a firm in Portland and left Montana without looking back. The distance widened fast. Texts dwindled. Calls felt forced. Holiday invitations were sent with asterisks. "Only if it works with your schedule. We get it if you're swamped with work." I skipped Thanksgiving 3 years in a row. Not because I was too busy, but because I couldn't stomach the quiet jabs and tense silence. Then, this December, something changed. Dad called, not a group text, not Mom forwarding a message, just him. "Natalie, sweetheart, we really miss you. Please come home for Christmas." There was something raw in his voice. I couldn't say no. I put in for time off, booked a flight to Bozeman, rented a car, and watched the snowy expanse of Montana roll by as I drove those final miles home. Evergreen forests gave way to familiar brick buildings, old gas stations, and the bakery where I'd had my first job. I prepared for this trip the best I could, rehearsed light conversation, picked out thoughtful gifts. For Dad, small batch roasted coffee from Portland. For Mom, a hand-woven scarf. For Dylan's kids, wooden puzzles. And for Leanne, a signed copy of a best-selling book on event planning, the kind she'd love. Downtown Bozeman sparkled under a dusting of snow. Lights twinkled along storefronts. The massive pine tree in the square stood just as I remembered. I parked half a block from my childhood home and texted, "Dad just arrived. See you in 5. His reply came immediately, "Can't wait." I gathered the bags and took a deep breath. White lights traced the porch roof. The carved nativity Dad made in '94 still stood in the yard. Wreaths adorned every window. The snow muffled everything. It felt sacred, familiar. I rang the doorbell. The porch light flickered on, and it wasn't Dad who opened the door. Through the frosted glass panels, I saw flickers of movement, shadows gliding across warm lamplight, bursts of laughter cutting through the wind. From inside, I caught the familiar crackle of vinyl and the unmistakable melody of White Christmas playing on Dad's old record player, the one he swore had better soul than anything modern. For a heartbeat, nostalgia wrapped around me like a blanket. I could almost forget the tension, the years of silence, the cracks in our foundation. The porch light above buzzed gently as heavy steps approached the door. I straightened my posture, tightened my grip on the gift bags, and pasted on a hopeful smile. The door swung open. But it wasn't Dad. It was Leanne. Her blonde hair fell in soft waves, her emerald dress hugging her pregnant frame like she'd stepped out of a Hallmark ad. For a fleeting second, the twinkle of the Christmas tree danced in her eyes. Then they narrowed. "We don't want you here," she said quietly, each syllable cutting like ice. "Go ruin someone else's holiday." The breath left my lungs. Behind her, the home I once knew came into full view. The warm dining room aglow with golden light, the table dressed with Mom's fine china, the hand-painted periwinkle set she reserved for only the most important occasions. The Christmas tree stood proud in its usual corner branches, heavy with 40 years of mismatched family ornaments. I spotted the tiny felt angel I made in second grade, the one Mom refused to throw away. At the table sat everyone. Dad's sleeves rolled up, carving the turkey like always. Mom arranging cranberry sauce into her heirloom crystal dish. Dylan and his wife Julia helped their twins Eli and Sophie settle into their chairs. Grandma Ruth beamed under the chandelier light. Uncle Dave and Aunt Lisa toasted with red wine, already tipsy and laughing. The only thing missing was me. They looked so content, so whole. As if my absence wasn't just unnoticed, it was preferred. The scent of sage stuffing and sweet potato casserole reached me thick and familiar. A memory and a wound. "Got it," I whispered. Barely audible, my voice cracking. Leanne didn't flinch. Her hand stayed firm on the doorknob. No flicker of guilt, no second thought. No one behind her turned to look. Maybe they didn't hear. Maybe they chose not to. I took a shaky step back, nearly slipping on the porch ice. The gifts I'd brought felt absurd, like apologies no one had asked for. The door closed slowly. The click of the lock echoed louder than any words. And I just stood there, snow settling quietly on my coat and in my hair. The windows glowed with golden warmth, silhouettes drifting behind the sheer curtains. Inside was light music and family. Outside was just me. The string of colored bulbs around the porch blinked cheerfully, oblivious to what had just happened. The walk back to my rental felt like a mile long. Each step through the powdery snow dragged like I was moving through wet cement. By the time I reached the car, my boots were soaked and my legs ached with a strange heaviness. I placed the gift bags gently on the passenger seat as if they were breakable, then collapsed behind the wheel. I didn't start the engine. I couldn't. My hands trembled too much to fit the key into the ignition. Instead, I sat in silence, my breath forming soft fog on the windshield. The air inside the car quickly turned cold, but I didn't notice. The tightness in my chest built with each passing second. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel, trying to steady myself. The tears came without sound at first. Then the dam broke. Sobs rattled through me, raw and sudden years of buried emotion spilling out in the quiet of a snowy street in Bozeman. 3 years of distance, 3 years of building a life. And this was what waited when I came home. For 10 minutes, I didn't move. Should I find a motel? Drive back to the airport, pretend this never happened. My brain tried to strategize, but my heart was frozen. Then the front door flew open. A figure rushed out into the night without a coat. I knew that shape, that gait, even after all this time. Dad. Natalie. Natalie, wait. His voice broke through the soft hush of snowfall. He half ran, half stumbled down the icy walkway in dress shoes, completely unsuited for Montana in December. No jacket, just a pressed white shirt and the burgundy tie Mom probably picked. I scrambled to wipe my face. Reflex. Dad never liked seeing me cry. He reached my window and knocked gently. I cracked it open. "Honey," he said, crouching a little to meet my eyes. "Please come back inside." Leanne had no right. None at all. "It's pretty clear where I stand, Dad," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head. "That's not true. Your mom and I were counting the days. Dylan, too. Even Grandma Ruth asked 3 times when you'd get here. But not Leanne." He sighed. "She's complicated. She's going through things. That doesn't excuse what just happened." "No, it doesn't," Dad said, surprising me with his honesty. "But there's more going on than you realize." He looked down at the snow gathering on his shoes. "She's jealous, Natalie." "Jealous," I repeated, incredulous. Of me, it sounded absurd. Leanne had always been the one who had it all: community praise, a seemingly perfect marriage, our parents' approval, wrapped in a bow. Dad nodded slowly. "Of your freedom, your work, your independence." He paused, brushing snow off his graying hair. "Kyle's station's been cutting hours. They've had to scale back, even sold their cabin up near Flathead. Leanne applied for a marketing role at the hospital downtown. Didn't get it. And when she heard you were flying in from Portland, doing well, thriving." His voice trailed off. The silence between us said the rest. I'd never seen my life as something Leanne might envy. In our family, her version of success had always been the standard. "That still doesn't excuse what she did," I said. "No, it doesn't," Dad repeated firmly. "And she will apologize. But please, Natalie, don't go. Don't let her drive you away from the rest of us who love you." His voice cracked just slightly. Dad had always played the role of peacemaker. But this was something else. There was conviction in his voice now. A quiet strength I hadn't expected. "I just don't want to make things worse," I said, hesitating. "The tension's been there for years," he replied. "Maybe it's time we stop pretending it isn't." Then he reached through the window and gently squeezed my hand. For me, those 2 words held decades of meaning. The whispered support, the envelope with $20 slipped into my college backpack, the framed clipping of my first article tucked behind the register at Harper's Hardware, even after Mom rolled her eyes. I nodded. "Okay, for you." He exhaled in visible relief, then opened my door and helped gather the gifts. As we walked toward the house, the colorful lights above the porch looked less festive, now more like silent witnesses to our very real, very imperfect family. "I've already talked to Leanne," he said. "Everyone knows what happened. This won't be brushed aside." The front door opened before we reached it. Mom stood there, her face unreadable, a storm of duty, hesitation, and something that might have been regret. "Natalie," she said, her voice tight, "come in. Come in before you catch your death." Not exactly the warmest welcome, but the door was open, and that counted for something. Stepping into the house felt like stepping into a time capsule. Everything looked exactly as it had 3 years ago. The same floral rug in the entryway, the same oak console table, even the same sequence of family portraits lined up along the hallway wall in chronological order. I noticed with mild surprise that my college graduation photo had finally been added. Small progress. The moment I stepped into the dining room, the hum of conversation dissolved into silence. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. Grandma Ruth was the first to move, rising to her feet with open arms. "Natalie, my darling girl." Her voice, warm and real, broke through the tension. I hugged her tightly, burying my face in her lavender-scented sweater. Dylan offered a half wave from his seat. "Hey, sis." His wife, Julia, smiled kindly beside him. Across the table, Leanne stared fixedly at her plate, jaw tight. Kyle nodded at me awkwardly, clearly unsure what to do. "Well," Mom said, with forced cheer, "slicing through the moment now that we're all here, let's eat. There's a place for you next to Grandma." Dad added gently, helping me set the gift bags under the tree before guiding me to my seat, strategically far from Leanne. A choice I appreciated more than I could say. The meal resumed, but the warmth didn't quite return. Dishes were passed in silence. I filled my plate robotically, though the scent of sage and roasted turkey filled the room. I had no appetite. Under the table, Grandma Ruth gave my hand a quiet squeeze. A tiny act of comfort. So Natalie said, "Uncle Dave, trying to pierce the awkwardness. How's life out west?" "It's good," I replied, grateful for the safe question. "Rainy, but beautiful. Portland's been kind to me. Must be nice living somewhere so exciting," Leanne said suddenly, her voice sweet, but the undertone sharp as ever. Dad shot her a look. "Natalie's been doing well," he said pointedly. "She was just promoted to senior strategist." "Right?" I nodded, surprised he'd remembered. "Yeah. We just signed a contract with the Windmere Hotel Group." Julia brightened. "Windmere. That's huge. Congratulations," Leanne stiffened. "Well, we've been busy too," she said flatly. "Kyle might be getting promoted to regional manager soon." I offered a polite smile, but I could feel it. The competition was far from over. "Right, Kyle?" I echoed politely. Her husband nodded, without looking up clearly, wanting no part in the subtle war playing out across the table. The conversation limped along, awkward and forced. Every topic floated just above the surface, weighed down with tension and unspoken history. As soon as things edged toward something real, someone shifted gears. Dylan did his best to keep things neutral, asking about Portland's food scene and the Trailblazers season. Mom kept looping back to local Bozeman events. I hadn't been part of school fundraisers, library renovations, the new bakery downtown. Dad tried to connect my job to his world, asking if our marketing strategies would work for the store's winter ad flyer. Through it all, Leanne never let up. Her questions were dipped in sugar, but meant to sting. "Don't you get lonely out there in the city? It must be hard not having family around." "I just can't imagine putting a job before family. But we all have our own values." By the time the plates were cleared and dessert arrived, my jaw ached from forcing a smile. "Who's ready for Grandma's famous apple pie?" Mom asked brightly, placing the steaming pie on the table with unnecessary drama. The scent of cinnamon and brown sugar pulled me back to a dozen childhood Christmases when things felt simpler. Grandma Ruth smiled at me. "Natalie, sweetheart, you always asked for the first slice." Before I could respond, Leanne cut in smooth and loud. "Actually, Sophie gets the first slice now. It's tradition." She ran her hand gently through her daughter's hair like a crown. "There's plenty to go around," Dad said quickly, throwing another subtle warning glance Leanne's way. I handed the plate to Sophie with a soft smile. "Your great-grandma makes the best pie in Montana." Sophie blinked at me, then said innocently, "Mom says you don't like Montana. That's why you left." Silence dropped like a curtain. All eyes turned to me. "I like Montana just fine," I said steady. "But sometimes people need to see what else is out there." "Speaking of exploring," Mom chirped suddenly, "Leanne's been doing amazing work with the Bozeman Preservation Society. Tell Natalie about the old courthouse project." As Leanne launched into a speech about her restoration efforts, I caught Dad's tired, apologetic look. The pattern was clear. Every moment that edged toward reconnecting with me was redirected toward Leanne. "Natalie could have helped with that newsletter," Mom added pointedly. "She always was good with words until she left." "Mom, Natalie has a career," Dylan said quietly. "A good one. She couldn't exactly commute from Portland to volunteer for local projects," Dylan said pointedly. "Of course not," Mom replied with a tight smile. "Her career is very important to her." The way she lingered on the word career made it sound like a dirty word, like I'd chosen ambition over family and should be ashamed of it. "So, how's the dating scene in Portland?" Aunt Lisa chimed in, trying to change the subject but stepping into another landmine. "I'm focusing on work right now," I answered evenly. Leanne let out a soft snort. "Always the job first. But hey, TikTok says 30 hits fast." I felt heat rising in my face. Some people want more from life than just being defined by who they're dating. "Girls," Dad interrupted quickly, "why don't we move into the living room for the gift exchange?" The transition was awkward, but we all stood and shifted into the glow of the Christmas tree. The children, Sophie and Eli, plopped down closest, buzzing with excitement. I passed out my carefully chosen gifts, heart hammering, as I watched each reaction. Dad opened the specialty Portland roasted coffee with genuine enthusiasm. Now this is a treat. Thanks, Nat. Mom accepted the hand-woven scarf with a thin smile. Lovely. Though you know I already have more scarves than I can wear. Dylan and Julia appreciated the handcrafted wooden toys. The kids will love these, Dylan said, while Leanne muttered, hopefully they're not full of chemicals. When she opened her signed event planning book, she barely looked up. Oh, thanks. I'm actually shifting away from event work, but maybe someone at the center can use it. My gifts from them were telling. A restaurant gift card for a chain that doesn't exist in Portland, a generic candle set. And from Leanne, a Bozeman high sweatshirt, size medium. I hadn't worn a medium in years. The message was subtle, but clear. You don't belong here anymore. Later, I tried to bond with Sophie and Eli, but Leanne kept redirecting them. When I mentioned maybe taking Sophie to the Portland Aquarium one day, Leanne cut in. She's terrified of flying. Anyway, we're going to Disney World this spring. The rejections kept stacking like snow, small, cold, and constant. Trying to stay cheerful, Julia asked about my apartment. I smiled and began describing the cozy loft with a Puget Sound view. As I gestured, my elbow knocked over my wine glass. The red wine splashed across the cream carpet. I'm so sorry, I exclaimed, leaping up to blot it. Of course you are, Leanne said flatly. Always making a mess of things, Natalie. Some things never change. Silence fell like snowfall. If you've ever held your breath at a family gathering, wondering if you'd ever truly belong, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one. Now here's what happened next. Even the kids seemed to pick up on the shift in the air. I'll grab the stain remover, Dad said quietly, disappearing toward the kitchen. But the damage wasn't to the carpet. It was to the fragile facade of holiday civility we'd all been pretending to uphold. Aunt Lisa leaned in and murmured something to Uncle Dave, who nodded with raised brows. Mom crouched to collect scraps of wrapping paper lips, pursed in a thin, unspoken line of judgment. I kept blotting at the red wine cheeks, flushed my hands, shaking with quiet humiliation. It reminded me of being 14, shattering her antique vase, and hearing her mutter, "Why is it always you?" The room splintered into smaller conversations, none of which included me. I sat awkwardly by the tree while others chatted in warm circles. Dad tried valiantly asking about Portland's parks and the new hotel campaign I'd worked on, but each time the topic fizzled out, absorbed by the surrounding indifference. I was just about to make an excuse to leave when Leanne stood and tapped her glass with a spoon. The room fell silent. Kyle and I have an announcement. She said, her expression glowing in a way I hadn't seen all evening. We weren't going to say anything until New Year's. But since we're all here, she paused intentionally, not looking at me. We wanted you all to be the first to know, she continued as Kyle joined her arm, snug around her waist. We're expecting again, he said, beaming. Baby number 3 is due next summer. The room erupted. Mom gasped and rushed over with tears in her eyes. Dad clapped Kyle on the shoulder. Grandma Ruth lit up like the tree itself. This is the best Christmas gift, Mom exclaimed, holding Leanne's hand like it was made of gold. I stayed seated, smiling politely, trying to summon genuine joy. I was happy for her kids, had always been her dream, but the timing of the announcement didn't feel accidental. We're just so grateful to raise our family here in Bozeman. Leanne added, finally locking eyes with me, surrounded by everyone who loves us. I couldn't imagine raising kids anywhere else, she continued sweetly. It's about being present for the big moments. Mom chimed in, still holding her hand. That's what matters, isn't it, family? Commitment. Being here. 3 years of hurt, thinly veiled digs. In this final performance, it all reached a boiling point. I set my dessert plate down, stood slowly, and said with practiced calm, Congratulations, Leanne, Kyle. I truly am happy for you. My voice came out steadier than I thought it would. And since we're all sharing big family moments, I said, eyes sweeping the room, I think it's time I shared something too. The room went still. Dad's expression shifted to one of quiet concern. Everyone else just stared. For the last 3 years, I began my fingers trembling slightly. I've tried to stay connected. I've called, I've sent gifts, birthdays, holidays, even random check-ins. I've invited anyone here to come visit me in Portland. Every offer was met with silence or an excuse. I glanced around the room. No one moved. I've listened to all the little digs about my job, my apartment, the fact that I left Bozeman, and I let it slide because, well, you're my family. I took a breath. Tonight I flew across the country, drove 6 hours through snow and ice because Dad said I was wanted here. My eyes locked on Leanne. Instead, I was told literally at the door that I wasn't welcome. A flush crept up Mom's neck. Natalie, you're blowing this out of proportion? No, Mom. My voice didn't shake. Please, just listen. I looked around the room again, meeting each pair of eyes. Every family has a narrative. Ours is that I abandoned you, that I was selfish, that Leanne's way is the only right way to live. But that's not true. That's just the story that makes everyone else more comfortable. I turned to face them one by one. Dad, I know you've tried. I'm grateful for that. But letting this dynamic keep happening without speaking up is a choice. Mom? I said softer now. You've made it clear my achievements don't count unless they look like Leanne's. They never will, and that's okay. But stop pretending they're less. Dylan, I added your silence when I'm being cut down. It's not neutral. It's a message. And finally, I looked at Leanne. You've been pushing me away since high school. I don't know why, but I know I've never deserved to be told I'm not welcome in this house. Silence wrapped around the room like a heavy winter coat. Then Grandma Ruth slowly stood, her voice calm but firm. She's right. The shock was palpable. No one interrupted. I've watched this for years. Shame on us, she said. Family isn't about zip codes. It's about respect, about letting people be who they are. Dad looked stricken. His earlier confidence had crumbled into remorse. Mom's expression flickered, caught between denial and something dangerously close to realization. Dylan stared down at the hardwood floor, visibly tense, the truth finally spoken and impossible to unhear. Kyle cleared his throat and shifted in his seat. I think maybe there's just been some misunderstanding. There's been no misunderstanding, Leanne snapped. Natalie always does this. She hijacks everything, even my pregnancy announcement. That's not what this is, I said softly. I congratulated you, truly. But your news doesn't erase 3 years of silence or what happened at the door tonight. I reached for my coat, the familiar feeling of frost already seeping into my chest. I think it's best if I go. Coming here was a mistake. Natalie, please, Dad started, but I shook my head. I'm not leaving town. I have a hotel room booked for the next 3 days. If anyone actually wants to talk, really talk, not just perform normalcy, you know how to find me. I walked toward the door again. This time, I didn't expect anyone to follow. I didn't want them to. And still, as I reached my car, I heard the door open again. Not just Dad this time. Dylan was close behind him, boots crunching over snow, no coat, his breath visible in the cold. Natalie, wait. I stopped, keys in hand, bone-tired. What's left to say? Dylan Dad reached me first, gently resting a hand on my shoulder. Everything he said quietly. There's everything left to say. Dylan shoved his hands into his jeans pockets, clearly uncomfortable, but not backing down. You were right, he admitted. I've been silent when it mattered. I should have said something a long time ago. Then the door creaked again. Mom stepped out slowly, arms folded tight, house slippers, nearly swallowed by the snow. She didn't speak at first, just stood there staring at the three of us. It's freezing, she said at last. But she didn't move to go back inside. Eleanor, Dad said, using her full name, something he rarely did. Our daughter was told she wasn't welcome tonight. I think the cold's the least of our concerns. Mom's posture stayed rigid, but something in her face, just a flicker, softened. I didn't know, she murmured, that Leanne said that. I thought you were just running late. I looked her in the eye. Would it have mattered if you had known the question hung there heavy with a decade of things we never said? Before Mom could respond, I noticed a flicker of movement through the frosted window. Leanne stood inside watching us. Her face was unreadable, somewhere between guarded and unsure. After a beat, she opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, arms folded, staying just far enough away to keep the emotional distance intact. "We need to talk," Dad said firmly, his voice cutting through the hush of falling snow. "All of us. No more pretending. No more sidestepping." In the snow, Mom protested, clutching her arms tighter. "If that's what it takes," he replied without flinching. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the door creaked again. Grandma Ruth emerged slowly, wrapped in a thick blanket. "For heaven's sake," she called out. "Either come inside or pull Natalie's car closer so I can freeze with the rest of you. I'm 88, not made of stone." A few reluctant chuckles broke the tension. Even Dad managed a faint smile. "She's right. Let's go to the sunroom," he said. "It's neutral ground." The sunroom had always been my favorite part of the house. A glass-walled space filled with trailing plants, old books and wicker chairs. In winter, with the heat vent cracked open, it became a cozy refuge where snow fell all around you but never touched you. We gathered awkwardly inside. Dad and I sat on the old wicker love seat. Mom took her usual chair, her posture tight. Dylan leaned against the doorframe, hands stuffed in his pockets. Leanne chose the ottoman farthest from me. Grandma Ruth settled into the rocking chair like an elder presiding over peace talks. "I'll start," Dad said, clearing his throat. "Natalie, I owe you an apology. A real one. I've tried to stay close, but I've also avoided hard conversations. And that's on me." He turned to Leanne. "And you owe your sister an apology for tonight. What you said? It was cruel and uncalled for." Leanne's eyes dropped to the floor, arms crossed, defensive. "Why?" I asked her gently. "What did I do that made you treat me like this?" "I don't hate you," she mumbled. "You think I do, but I don't." "Could have fooled me?" She finally looked up. "You left, Natalie. You just left. Like none of this mattered." "I moved for work," I replied. "I didn't abandon anyone. I tried." Leanne scoffed. "You couldn't wait to get away from Bozeman." "From the constant comparisons, maybe," I said. "From always being told that my dreams weren't the right kind." Mom shifted in her seat, uncomfortable but silent. "We never said your dreams were wrong," Mom replied defensively. "You didn't have to," I said quietly. "It was in your tone, in your silence, in the way every one of Leanne's choices got a celebration, and mine were just endured." To my surprise, Dylan nodded. "She's right, Mom. Even I noticed. And I wasn't the one constantly being compared." Mom's eyes widened. She turned to him like he'd betrayed something sacred. "Is that really how you felt, Natalie?" There was a flicker in her voice, uncertainty, a crack in her certainty. "Yes," I answered simply. "It still is." Dad reached over and took my hand. "I should have said something years ago," he murmured. "I thought keeping the peace was the same as creating harmony. But I see now it wasn't." Suddenly, Leanne stood her chair creaking behind her. She began pacing the room, arms folded tightly. "You want to know why I said what I did tonight?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because pushing you away is easier than admitting I'm jealous." The room fell into stunned silence. "You've got this big, exciting life in Portland," she went on. "You work with real clients, travel, get promoted. And me. I've planned the Bozeman Winter Fair 8 years in a row." She stopped pacing, blinking rapidly. "Kyle's job cut hours. We had to sell our house. I applied for a marketing director job in Billings, used some of your old projects for inspiration, and didn't even get a call back." Tears welled in her eyes. "You make it all look easy. And every time Mom brings up your promotions or shows someone your Instagram, it just reminds me that I'm stuck while you're out there." I stared at her, stunned. "Leanne?" I had no idea. She shrugged. "You never tell us when things go wrong. Because whenever I tried, Mom would say, 'That wouldn't happen in Bozeman,' or hint that I should just move home." Mom flinched slightly, the realization settling in. Grandma Ruth cleared her throat and leaned forward in her rocker. "If I might offer some perspective from 9 decades of family drama." Her tone was calm but sharp. "Eleanor, you've always favored the child who mirrors you. Jim, you've avoided conflict so long the cracks became canyons. Leanne, you've tied your self-worth to your mother's approval. Natalie, you run from pain instead of addressing it. And Dylan, she looked him straight in the eye, you've stood on the sidelines too long. No one argued. Not even Mom. Family patterns. Grandma Ruth continued. Don't break until someone is brave enough to name them. Natalie did that tonight. Grandma Ruth said, her voice steady. Now, the question is, what will the rest of you do with that truth? Silence stretched in the warmth of the sunroom, the snow beyond the glass glimmering in the moonlight. Then, unexpectedly, Mom spoke first. I've been unfair to you, Natalie. Her voice quivered, something I'd never heard from her before. I think I pushed against your choices so hard because deep down I wished I'd had your courage when I was your age. Her confession landed with a soft, seismic jolt. I got a job offer in Chicago after college. She continued, eyes distant. Turned it down. The thought of leaving Bozeman, of leaving everything, I just couldn't do it. And watching me take that leap, I said gently, made you wonder what your life could have been. She nodded slowly, eyes shining. Leanne sniffled, wiping her cheek with the sleeve of her sweater. I'm sorry, too, for what I said at the door. It was cruel, not unforgivable, I said softly. Just deeply painful. Dylan shifted. So, where do we go from here? Dad sat up straighter, a new firmness in his voice. We start over, with a real Christmas dinner, one Natalie actually gets to enjoy. It's nearly midnight, Mom murmured, glancing at the clock. Then we'll have Christmas dinner tomorrow, Dad declared. And before that, I think we all could benefit from speaking with Dr. Levinson again. The family therapist. Leanne's eyes widened. Wait, are we really doing therapy? Yes, Dad replied without hesitation. This isn't going to get fixed with one heart-to-heart. We need real help, to break patterns, to move forward. To my surprise, no one pushed back. Even Mom nodded slowly. Natalie, Dad continued, turning to me. Will you stay? Not at the hotel? Stay here, in your old room. Give us a chance. His vulnerability cracked something open in me. Yes, I said, my voice quiet. I'll stay. Grandma Ruth smiled knowingly. Well then, since we've opened all the emotional wounds, I believe there's still half an apple pie left in the kitchen. That earned a few tired chuckles. As we stood to return inside, Leanne stepped closer. I really am sorry, she said quietly. And congrats on the Windmere account. That's seriously impressive. Thanks, I replied. And congratulations on your pregnancy. You're a wonderful mom, Leanne. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. As we stepped back inside, the snow had stopped falling. The night sky had cleared, stars glittering between drifting clouds. Nothing was entirely fixed, but something essential had shifted. For the first time in years, it felt like we were finding our way back to being a real family. 1 year later, I stood again on the snowy front porch of the Harper home. But this time, there was no hesitation before ringing the doorbell. Through the frosted glass, I saw twinkling Christmas tree lights and heard the familiar hum of laughter. The door swung open to reveal Dad grinning beneath the ridiculous Santa apron I'd mailed him from Portland. Natalie. He pulled me into a bear hug. Right on time. The scent of pine needles and cinnamon wrapped around me as I stepped inside, shedding my coat. But this time, that scent wasn't tainted by tension. It felt like home again. Immediately, I noticed the differences. The hallway gallery had been updated photos from my visits to Portland, a group shot of all of us at the coast last summer, and one that made my breath catch, a framed picture of Leanne and me both smiling as we held her newborn son, Thomas. She'd named him partly after Uncle Dave, and she'd surprised me by saying partly after Thomas Street Market in Portland, where I'd taken her during her first real visit out west. The past year had been one of rebuilding. Dad had followed through scheduling our first session with Dr. Levinson the day after that fateful Christmas. It had been uncomfortable, raw, and completely necessary. Dr. Levinson helped us name the unspoken patterns we'd lived under for decades. We met monthly, sometimes in person, sometimes over video when I couldn't fly in. It wasn't easy. There were regressions, raised voices, tears, but there was also progress. Even Mom, who had resisted hardest, began to soften. She stopped comparing everything to Bozeman. When she visited me in April, she didn't say a word about traffic or noise. Instead, she stood with me on the waterfront and whispered, "It's beautiful here." The biggest surprise was Leanne. After her son was born in June, she reached out. "Would you come visit?" she asked. "I'd like you to meet him." So I did. Not as a distant relative or a rival, but as a sister, slowly finally becoming a friend. During late-night feeding sessions with baby Thomas, Leanne had started opening up to me about how overwhelmed she often felt despite appearing so composed. That vulnerability created space for something we hadn't had in years, real connection. By July, she was texting me drafts of her resume, asking for feedback, cautiously dipping her toes into the idea of re-entering the workforce in a way that worked with her life as a mom. I kept my promise to visit more. Every couple of months, I made the trip from Portland. The visits weren't perfect. Mom still occasionally commented that my city was a little too liberal, and Leanne would sometimes slip back into old patterns. But the difference now was we named it. We talked about it. And that made all the difference. Natalie, Sophie, and Eli came flying from the living room, throwing their arms around my legs. Behind them came Leanne, baby Thomas, bouncing on her hip. "You made it," she said, smiling. "A real one. No tightness, no subtext." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, reaching out to touch Thomas's soft cheek. "How's my favorite nephew?" "He's crawling," she said with a tired laugh. "Nothing in the house is safe." Mom emerged from the kitchen, flour dusted across her Christmas sweater. "Natalie, good you're here. Can you help with the pie crust mine keeps tearing?" It was a simple request, but to me, it felt like a milestone, Mom asking for help, not correction. Of course, I said, following her in. "Though you know Grandma's is always better than anything we make." "She's teaching me," now Mom said a little sheepishly. "Says it's time to pass it down." At the kitchen table, Grandma Ruth sat like a queen, wrapped in a shawl, presiding over the cooking with all her usual wisdom. After her minor stroke in March, her mobility had slowed, but her voice remained strong. "There's my traveling girl," she said warmly, as I bent to kiss her cheek. "Bring any of that Portland drizzle with you. Just Montana snow." I smiled. The kitchen was alive. Dylan and Julia chopping vegetables, Kyle mixing cocktails, Dad basting the turkey. But it wasn't forced this time. The politeness of old had been replaced by something better ease. And when conversation turned to my recent promotion, Leanne didn't bristle. She grinned. "Actually," she said, bouncing Thomas, "I got the part-time marketing role with the Regional Tourism Board. I start in January." "Leanne, that's fantastic. That's amazing," I said, genuinely thrilled for her. "It's just 3 days a week," Leanne explained, "and I can do most of it from home. But it's a start." "A good start," Mom added. And the pride in her voice, spoken aloud, unguarded, was new, healing. The kind of support that had once been reserved only for Leanne's more traditional milestones. Later, as we gathered around the dinner table, the same table where things had fallen apart a year ago, Dad raised his glass for a toast. "To family," he said. "Not perfect, still learning, but trying. And to second chances." We clinked glasses, the sound gentle and real. Across the table, I met Leanne's eyes. The smallest smile passed between us. It wasn't a perfect sisterly bond. Not yet, but it was something honest, something real. And that was more than we'd had in a long time. After dinner, we carried our dessert into the living room. Plates of pie balanced on laps, the fireplace crackling. Grandma Ruth nodding off with baby Thomas nestled in her arms. I glanced around the room, feeling the quiet warmth of a family slowly rebuilding. This last year hadn't been smooth. There were arguments, stumbles, and long silences. Forgiveness didn't come in sweeping moments, it came in pieces. Awkward calls, tearful apologies, and hard truths we could no longer hide behind smiles. But what healed us wasn't pretending. It was choosing to face what we'd avoided for too long. For years, we'd been a family of careful politeness, polished holidays, quiet resentment. But by breaking that illusion, by daring to name the things that hurt, we finally gave ourselves a chance to grow. As Sophie showed me her handmade snowflake ornament and Eli drove his toy truck in loops on the rug, I realized that healing doesn't look like perfection. It looks like this, Natalie Dad said, settling beside me on the couch. Penny, for your thoughts. Just thinking about last Christmas, I replied, watching the firelight dance on the window, and how different things are. He nodded, eyes soft. One of the hardest and best nights of my life. It took courage to say what I did, I admitted, and it took courage for the rest of us to finally hear it. He said. Later, as coats were gathered and goodbyes exchanged, I stood once more at the front door this time, from the inside looking out. Snow covered the yard in quiet beauty. Family is complicated. Healing isn't linear, but sometimes the most painful moments become the beginning of everything worth saving. If you've made it this far, I'd love to hear from you. What would you have done in my shoes? Drop a comment. I'm still learning how to navigate complicated love, unspoken resentment, and what forgiveness really looks like. If you've ever stood your ground in a room full of people who didn't see you clearly, I see you. My biggest lesson: speak your truth even if your voice shakes. Don't let silence build walls that love can't reach. Tell me your story. Give me your advice. And if you believe healing is possible, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.